Hello, everyone. Welcome to Mad Media. I'm Grimvera, and as always, I'm here with my good friend Tony Crow. How are you doing today, Tony?
Real good, thank you.
Awesome. So today we're going to be doing something a little bit different than all, and we're going to jump into a few things that are more immediately current, not our usual thing of talking about things that are largely current, but also pertain to trends that go into the past. What we're going to be handling today is the left's freak out over their self-instilled fear that Roe versus Wade might be overturned because of the president's Supreme Court pick, and potential future picks that he might have as a result of the current sitting judges getting old and retiring or dying or whatever. And then we're also going to be covering Trump's visit to Europe and his interactions with Putin recently and the general sentiments there and how this all ties in to overall global politics. So just going to jump right in here and get started on Roe versus Wade. I know some people in Europe might not know what it is, but essentially it's a Supreme Court case that took place back in 1973. And that case ruled that it's a criminal offense that violates due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. However, the ruling does have the caveat that it's supposedly it has constitutional protection that must be balanced against a state's interests in regulating abortions as they pertain to the health of women and protecting the potential of developing human life.
Yeah. That it was. Well, what one of the things that I'm not really understanding is that a protection that must be balanced against the state's interest is that saying that that the federal government was just overriding the state's decisions on abortion?
It definitely seems like it because the laws in question that led to Roe versus Wade being a case to begin with was a Texas law that outlawed abortion pretty much flat out, with the exception of allowing it in the circumstances of the mother not being able to survive childbirth. And I'm guessing there's probably some other ones that were in there as well, because I can imagine that if it's a case where the child wouldn't live to term, that might be an exception as well. But I couldn't find any hard evidence of that. But overall, yeah, it seems like the Supreme Court was using the 14th Amendment as a way to completely trample all over the state's sovereignty over their own laws.
Hmm. Yeah, that was kind of interesting uh, about a woman not being able to carry the baby to full term. How would they know? Like she was just sick or something?
Well, there are conditions that exist that would be immediately identifiable, and I when we were talking over the show yesterday, I brought up the unfortunate incident of when my own mother was pregnant with a child that should have been my older sister. Child had all kinds of holes in her heart and wouldn't have been able to live for the full term. So that was an instance of being an immediately recognizable instance. And we'll get into
Hmm.
more of this particular story in a little bit, but yeah, that's a case of something that you can pretty much just look at the fetus and immediately identify uh, a a critical problem.
Okay. Yeah,
So
I wonder when they got the ability to do that. But I think what you wanted to do was go through some of the trials in chronological order.
yeah, because Roe versus Wade kind of set a precedent and really opened the door for muddying this topic which already, because of various sentimental reasons across the political spectrum, was already kind of a complex issue. I mean, abortion was an issue back at the turn of the century, but it wasn't until Roe versus Wade when it really, really got thrust into the spotlight of public opinion. And there are a few trials. There's actually quite a few trials, but there were four in particular that kind of stuck out as being particularly important. Like, for instance, a couple years after Roe versus Wade, there was the case of Planned Parenthood versus Danforth on July 1st of '76, and that overturned a Missouri law that required a married woman to get her husband's consent before the abortion is greenlit. So, in essence, before that was overturned, Missouri had a law stating that if a woman wanted to get an abortion and she was married, she had to get the consent of the father, the consent of the husband. And overriding that set the precedent for this modern sentiment that you typically see on the left of, how it doesn't matter what the father may or may not want. It's all about what the woman wants for her own body. Damn be the child, damn be the father.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that type of thing was, they were actually going through that in the '70s. That they still had that rule intact by then.
Yeah, well, it was in Missouri, so you can argue that, well, of course it was in Missouri. Look at what part of the country Missouri's in. But
Hmm.
it did set the precedent for how the left and particularly the feminist movement kind of took the abortion issue and ran with it towards more openness for what's acceptable as a reason for an abortion, and laid the foundation for kind of writing the father out of family matters.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what just came to my mind was what kind of connection does a husband and wife have when she will go around his back to get an abortion?
Right. I mean, that's ultimately the reason marriage exists. That's the reason people have sex. It's for procreation. So when you overturn a law like what was overturned, you're pretty much telling fathers that they don't matter. Their opinion doesn't matter. That in terms of their potential children, zero voice.
Yeah, devastating. I would imagine that some policies like that would fracture apart families, no doubt.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things that continue to open more and more doors towards hypergamy and degenerate behavior. Hyper feminism, uh, gynocentrism. It really did a lot more damage than people even back then who were advocating for it probably even realized.
Yeah, and then I think you had an example from the late '80s.
Oh yeah, on July 3rd of '89, the case was Webster versus the Reproductive Health Services. And that one was a ruling that declared a barring of public facilities from being used to conduct abortions and prohibited public health workers from performing abortions unless the life of the mother was at risk. The statute also defined life as beginning at conception, as directed physicians to perform fetal viability tests on women who were 20 or more weeks pregnant and seeking abortions. The declaration that life begins at conception does not contradict Roe because the declaration is contained in the statute's preamble, and so it would have no real impact on a woman's access to get an abortive procedure.
Yeah, and I wonder what qualifies as public facilities in that language. But
Well,
we know public health workers, probably the type of people to be willing to cater to whatever women want, like, who am I to judge? This sort of thinking.
yeah, that's something that you see pressing into medical services more and more and more, um, because of this onslaught of push for nationalized healthcare and letting the state into the doctor's office, so to speak. It's lending itself to a more progressive hospital atmosphere overall. And this particular instance, it seems like it was designed to kind of get around some of the complex wording of Roe versus Wade, which, if you read the law, it's obvious that it was constructed in such a way that liberals would be able to perform verbal and mental gymnastics to ultimately have it warped in their favor regardless.
Yeah, yeah. Would you mind if I kind of go over a little bit of the verbal gymnastics on this one?
Oh, by all means, have at it.
Yeah, so it says the statute also defined life as beginning at conception. And I think that that is a point of argument between some people that, when is the fetus considered alive? And the way that I understand conception is that the life is initialized at the conception, that the sperm alone and the egg alone cannot make life, but the two initialize life. And it's sort of like when you're thinking about a plant. I don't know if you've ever done like sprouts in the house, where you soak the sprouts, or you soak the beans, or whatever it is, and then a few days later of rinsing that around, it develops a tail and that sort of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, my grandfather had a garden, and he kind of showed me the basics of gardening and how seeds sprout and whatnot, using what you just described.
Yeah, yeah. So in that case, you have the seed, and then the water initializes the life. So I would think that most people on our side would argue that, like a seed, once it's initialized, it's alive. Like, nobody goes to their sprouts that are, developing a tail and a root, and they don't look at that and say that that's not alive yet. But some people do that with the fetus. That when they initialize the fetus, then they say, "Oh, well, it's not actually alive yet. It's just a cluster of cells." And the minimization of the importance of that fetus is awful. It's just truly awful, and it's dehumanizing to both the fetus and to the adults who have created it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, that cluster of cells, yeah, it might just be, a quote unquote cluster of cells at that point, but it's still genetically human. It still has
Yeah.
the same genetic structures as the rest of us, and it has the genetic structure of both of its parents. At least part of each. So yeah, it is human. And if you want to argue the semantics of, well, it's not technically a person until, for example, 20 weeks. Well, what if it's 19 weeks, 23 hours, or 19 weeks, 6 days, 23 hours, and 59 seconds? Like the 1 second difference between officially 20 weeks. Is it a human after that 1 second passes, or just before? When do you make that determination? So
Mhm.
it's not a life until 20 weeks. It's kind of an arbitrary thing to say. It allows the argument for pushing the goalpost of when is life forth. Whereas if you just declare it's a life at conception, that completely destroys that argument. You can't say, well, it's not a life once one blink of an eye, but then it is the next eye because, this amount of cells for this organ just happened to finish forming right then and there. It's a stupid argument.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for indulging in the the verbal gymnastics with me, because it's nice sometimes to unpack it like that. If we could just move on to the next part, there was another case that you included in the research, which was Stenberg versus Carhart in 2000, which was the Supreme Court overturned a Nebraska ban on partial birth abortions, and this invalidates abortion laws in 30 other states. So that's another instance of a Supreme Court federal ruling overriding states' rights, if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, because as you see there, it did invalidate abortion laws in 30 other states. And, I don't want to go too much more into this one, unfortunately, because honestly, the idea of partial birth abortions, it's disgusting. And the fact that anybody supports it is absolutely horrendous. I mean, it's even right there in the name, partial birth abortions. Yeah, I just don't see how anybody can advocate for it and live with themselves.
Yeah. And then 2003, that comes up again, signed by George W. Bush to unilaterally ban partial birth abortions. There might have been a thing going on there where they allowed it and then it just provoked horror. So who knows? But it's interesting. There has been, a pretty strong, or people are, have they voiced their thoughts, opinions, and knowledge about this topic pretty often. But it says this was upheld in 2007 during Gonzalez versus Carhart and Gonzalez versus Planned Parenthood Federation of America. So, yeah, that's an awful thing. I mean, I don't blame you for not wanting to go into it too much. It's a hideous thing to have to consider that.
It is, and as much as there are things that I disagree with George W. Bush on overall, I mean, I got to give him credit on this one for signing that, because it's disgusting that the Supreme Court was kind of used by liberal judges to push this agenda. So, I mean, you can argue the constitutionality of that, but you know what? People large and by didn't really want to question Barack Obama's executive orders, even when they were in fact illegal. So, I mean, kudos to W on this, on signing this, and subsequently the court upholding it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, like I said, there's a lot of other trials you can go and look up. I mean, definitely more than we'd be able to cover here. At least if we wanted to, do everything we had planned for today. It's a very serious subject, and it's worth getting to. Not only the cases, but there's other things that abortion opens the doors for. I mean, it kind of grants access for more degenerate behavior, because it removes accountability for one's actions. Because a girl can look at this and go, well, I can go around and slut about, and if I get pregnant, all I have to do is go down to my friendly neighborhood Planned Parenthood and they'll suck that thing on out of me, and I can keep going on being degenerate and not have to worry about the natural consequences of my actions.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, it's right that it does open the door for more degenerate behavior, because it doesn't give a person the natural consequences of haphazard conception. So typically, what the ideal situation is that a man and a woman would get together and they would plan like their life together, and then they would plan to have a baby. We're talking an ideal situation, and also ideally they have a community around them that supports this. But when people can just haphazardly conceive, they could just have sex with people, and then just go have an abortion if they get pregnant. That we're so many steps down the road of failures in that regard. We're so far away from the ideal situation that it's hard to imagine how to get back to the right way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's something that's kind of odd when people advocate for abortion within, just conservative generality and, overall, but more specifically, what you and I advocate for, and, what we have, what Madot constructed to uphold and promote. When people on our side, in one breath, say that, oh, humanity is so stepped away from nature, we need to go back to nature and the natural order of things and step away from the disgustingness of modernity, then they turn around and in the next breath say that, well, we need to allow abortions to stay legal because of, rape, incest, race mixed births that can result from these, etc. It's, those are instances that are fortunately so proportionately small that we shouldn't be basing the entire policy on it, especially if you're advocating for going back to the natural order of things, because the abortion is so unnatural in its construction because it's artificially constricting human reproduction.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and another thought that came to mind was, I had a pal some years back, and eventually, after getting to know him, he and his mother were telling me that she was actually raped when she was younger, and that my friend was actually the product of that rape. And she kept the baby, obviously, and I was just going through this thought that um, the the difficult situation that someone's in, if they are raped, do do you keep it? Do you not? And I would imagine that the the very, very, some women consider that to be very serious while others don't. But I would imagine that there is a lot of emotional trauma that could be caused to, multiple different parties in this who are involved. But, I was just thinking that if my friend's mother would have had an abortion, I never would have had the opportunity to have that man as my friend. And for me, that's an awful thought, but uh, I could also see where a woman facing the predicament where she's been raped and she becomes pregnant from it, that that would not be for some women, that would not be the type of man that they would want to have a child with. And that would be extremely far away from the ideal path that I outlined earlier. You know, so the psychologically, it's an extremely difficult uh, thing. That's why I don't really have like a conclusion on what I think is the right way to go, but I can understand it from all these different perspectives. I mean, I can even understand that people want to haphazardly conceive and just, sleep around and stuff. But it's a bit bestial. It's not very refined.
Yeah, well, I mean that's the fun part is the conception, isn't it? Yeah, but it there there are all kinds of psychological traumas that crop up, and again, going back to the anecdote I shared about um, the pregnancy that should have resulted in my older sister, my mother ended up aborting that one, even though she's fundamentally against abortion. But the fact that the child wouldn't have even lived to term made it optimal for her health, because otherwise it would have been a stillbirth and could have possibly left all kinds of toxins in her body. And my grandmother took her to get the procedure done behind my grandfather's back, uh, and my mother, she still lives with the weight of having to do that, even though the child was damned to death before it was even born anyway. Just the idea that she had to do that to her own child has left her with scars about it, almost almost 3.5 decades after it happened.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of trauma that can come about, which I think is why the left is trying to normalize the idea that it's not a child, that it's not a person, to maybe try to say, see, there isn't any psychological damage by just numbing young women into not caring about the things that they should be caring about the most. Um, it's it's kind of disgusting design is that if you look at it objectively, you can see, because look at the kind of people that the left is pushing to get abortions. White people predominantly, but if you look at a lot of abortion propaganda, it's young white couples that are happy together getting it. You don't see them advocating for dumb, trashy people or other racial demographics to get abortions. Um, and you don't see single mother white trash being advocated to get the procedure done. So it's very specific targeting that kind of reveals the overall scheme of why progressives, why globalists push this idea that abortion should be anytime for any reason.
Hmm. Yeah, just before we speak a bit more to like the demographics of it, I just wanted to touch back on something you said, which was if a woman gets an abortion and she is psychologically traumatized from that, physically, mentally, and spiritually, she could be traumatized. And there's little or no encouragement from community, from people around to process that trauma. So what ends up happening is people have a sort of wound that they don't know how to treat. And also, if you do, like, if they did go see like a psychologist, most people actually don't go through all the way until they figure it out, until they actually come to terms with it, because it's very difficult. Not just with abortion, but any kind of trauma is difficult to work out. And then one other thing I wanted to mention, just as an aside, was that there was something that I learned a few years back, that a woman who is unhealthy oftentimes will have several different miscarriages before she can actually conceive a child, because her body is too intoxicated, and the first few fetuses actually end up taking a large toxic load. And one of the things that you will notice with many modern females and just modern people in general is like a statistic I heard was that 25% of modern adult women are on psychopharmaceuticals. and also many women are just unhealthy. Many people are just unhealthy. So a lot of times it's the fetus that takes that toxic load, and then it is aborted by the woman's own body. And that will happen maybe a handful of times with some women before they actually conceive. So it's sort of a horrible atmosphere for some women who, especially unhealthy women or women who are drinking or on drugs or pharmaceuticals, for them to try to conceive. It's a horror show.
Yeah, it's an issue that definitely does tie into these other things for multiple reasons. And unfortunately, overall, like you said, this is a really hard issue uh, to get to the nuances of what's right and what's wrong, because in some of these instances that you'll hear abortion advocates bring up, it's going to cause some kind of trauma to one of the parties. Whether it's the death of the child and the psychological trauma it can cause the mother, or in the instance of rape babies, the child then has to live with the fallout of what led to its birth. But those are instances where neither the mother or the child is necessarily uh, at fault. So if you get the abortion done, you can argue that it's offloading the punishment for the initial crime of rape on this child, who is nothing more than another casualty of the instance. So it's one of those issues where no matter which way you go, there's going to be some sort of turmoil and trauma. And the only real answer I see is, trying to uh, better remedy ourselves as a society, whether that be through methods of racial demographic segregation, because then you separate incompatible cultures, or something else. It's not an easy issue, and it kind of pisses me off when either side just throws out their argument as the absolute and blatantly disregards all the nuances of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's people are mostly discouraged from processing their trauma. But most people they only have awareness of physical trauma. It's very obvious, overt sort of thing, like someone gets hit with a hammer. Then they'll recognize it. But if someone is harmed emotionally, they don't. But anyway, just for I guess for the sake of time and to kind of transition, uh, I wanted to discuss a few different articles that we found during the course of research. So the first one was a Breitbart article that we were looking at, entitled "Senator Collins Supreme Court Pick Who Would Overrule Roe versus Wade is Unacceptable." So the little background on this: on Sunday, Senator Susan Collins, the Rhino senator from Maine, told ABC's This Week that a Supreme Court pick who had made clear that he would overrule Roe versus Wade would be unacceptable, but that she would vote for someone who shows great respect for precedent because she thinks that a justice would regard Roe as, quote, settled law. So there's that. So it's sort of a roundabout way of they don't have to say that I support this or that. It's just I support the precedent. So that's kind of an interesting play on words there. But just a little more is along with Senator Joe Lieberman, Collins authored a major overhaul of our nation's intelligence community after September 11th attacks, and also led the successful effort to repeal the discriminatory Don't Ask, Don't Tell law that prohibited gay and lesbian Americans from serving openly in the military. So Collins is, part of that cadre who is encouraging the, tranny soldiers and stuff like that. That's going to bring down the military. And then Senator Collins suggested that Trump, broaden his search beyond the list of 25 nominees. like the list of 25, there's that many. That's unacceptable. We have to go outside of anyone that Trump chose. Trump should choose someone that he didn't choose, which is funny. But most importantly of all, they should respect the precedent. So not the president, but the precedent of Roe versus Wade. So yeah, what do you think about Collins?
Another swamp political hack that ought to be sent to the gallows, in my honest opinion. But the language of settled law, it's interesting because it reminds me immediately of the term settled science. Well, if you know anything about science, you know that the whole foundation of it is nothing is absolutely settled. You always learn more and you always kind of keep going with what you learn. But with settled law, it kind of flies in the face of the leftist claim that the Constitution is a living document that needs to constantly change and evolve. So how can you have settled law with the 14th Amendment, which is the Constitution, which, according to liberals, is a living document that's always subject to change? It's kind of they're wanting to have their cake and eat it too. So you only solidify what's there if it's what liberals favor, but if it's anybody to the right of them, then it's a living document now. It's kind of duplicitous. It's stupid.
Yeah. Yeah, very. So another one was a VDare article that we were checking out from Patrick Buchanan, and it's entitled "Is Trump is a Trump court in the making?" Got a little tongue tied there. So Buchanan's VDare article is a very good chronology for the Supreme Court justice activism of the left, and Buchanan lays out the goods on what justices did and when in remaking the country into their vision of a literal globo homo gayplex. We've got the
hashtag.
Yeah, we've got the actually you can search for that hashtag. I thought I posted on it, but someone else did. Globo homo gayplex. Yeah, we've got a few points from that to go over that were pretty good. So for liberalism's great strategic ally and asset of 60 years, the judicial dictatorship erected by Earl Warren and associates may be about to fail. Judicial supremacy may be on the way out. Another constitutionalist on the court, in the tradition of Antonin Scalia, could ring down the curtain of social revolution the court has been imposing since the salad days of Chief Justice Earl Warren. I don't know what the salad days are. I don't know that saying.
I don't know. I'm gonna look that up. That's interesting.
Yeah, but Buchanan is an incredible guy. But a little bit more, a few interesting things about these justices. Among the changes, Warren's court and its successors succeeded in imposing the de-Christianization of all public institutions in America. So they got purged. Just continuing the social war of the 1970s over forced busing of racial balance in the public schools. Oh yeah, forced busing for the racial balance. So they were like busing kids like long distance to get into white schools from the black areas. The creation ex nihilo of new constitutional rights, first to an abortion, then to homosexuality, and then same-sex marriage. So yeah, they've that's been a big subject. That's been something on people's radar for a while. Is the the judicial tyranny going on. And then just a last sort of, or one of the last sort of weird factoids on this was Warren, who, as California's governor, had pushed to put Japanese Americans in concentration camps in World War II, and William Brennan, the most radical justice, to sit in over half a century. So that's interesting that these people, pushing the gay agenda and gynocentrism were also responsible for the concentration camps.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder if they were responsible for the camps in Europe that German soldiers were thrown into and just more or less left to die in. So that's another thing that'll probably be working out. By the way, salad days, just as a quick drop in here, it's as per Wikipedia here, it's a Shakespearean idiomatic expression meaning a youthful time accompanied by the inexperience, enthusiasm, idealism, innocence, or indiscretion that one associates with a young person. So if you want to, drop that in your list of idioms you can use, there you go. But
Yeah.
back to what we're talking about. It's a case that even establishment conservatives have been making for a long time, and they've been laughed at. The right's been laughed at over and over again regarding the abortion leading to homosexuality, etc., etc. We're seeing that start to come full circle now, and the realization of things that were laughed at, like, oh, they're coming for the children. They're coming for your children. That's exactly what they're doing, because now you're starting to see some leftists try to push that pedophilia is just another sexual orientation, and we ought to just accept it. And you're seeing parents take their kids to these pride parades where they're put in front of people in bondage gear, people stark ass naked, people simulating acts of intercourse in public right there in front of children. And you're seeing young 9-year-olds being flaunted as trannies, and they're dancing provocatively. So yeah, they're coming after our children. That's exactly what they're doing. And if you continue to laugh at it, well, I'm just gonna show you that meme there of Will Smith, showing, hey, look right here, with his hands out, like, here's the example right here. How do you miss this?
Yeah, exactly. They always try to minimize the effects of the trauma on the children and adults, and then what they do is they just reframe it. What they do is they reframe people's damage as a virtue when it's really not. Because it's not earned. It's not earned. It's not practice. It's not discipline. It's the opposite. So that's the inversion that they're always going for. But just one of the last sort of examples that a team member, typist, uncovered was that I think possibly Trump's top pick, Kavanaugh. She uncovered some things, I think from Jewish sources, that, in quote, during his time in private practice, Kavanaugh took on pro bono cases, including that of Reconstructionist synagogue Adat Shalom in Bethesda, Maryland, which was facing challenges from its neighbors in constructing the building. In 2000, a U.S. district court sided with the synagogue, saying that a permit issued to the congregation was consistent with the Establishment Clause. The synagogue confirmed to JTA that it was represented by Kavanaugh, but did not return a request for further comment in time for publication. So it's an interesting fact that Trump's top pick. Some people on our side have been saying that he's our guy, hashtag our guy. But he does have this sort of history of at least in this case, this one case that we discovered. There could be more, but he was representing this synagogue. And when we looked into the case, the community around there was they were protesting this synagogue, and it was not just a synagogue building. It was like a giant Jewish community center with worship and business and lots of different things going on there. So the people over there in Bethesda were trying to protest this, and they got a organization together to oppose it. But in the end, they were unsuccessful, and Kavanaugh rammed this through pro bono for them.
Yeah, it raises the question of what are Trump's politics, who's right in their description of him. Is it the people that say, yeah, he's our guy, he's pushing for nationalism, or is it the people who are going, no, he's a Jewish, he's gonna hurt us, he hasn't delivered on diddly squat. When I don't think that the president looks at it in that perspective. I don't think he really associates all the crap that's going on with what the cabals have been pushing for as long as humans have been around. Just about. Um, it's it's a really fascinating thing because yes, Trump, his son-in-law is a Jew. He surrounds himself with them. He's appointing, in this instance, these judges that are synagogue ramming. I think I'm going to keep that term. I kind of like it. It covers it rather well. But these these things that you can point to as evidence that no, he's more pro-Jew than pro-American. But then look at what he went to Europe to advocate for, ripping Theresa May a new one about their immigration policy and saying that they need to start looking out for the native Brits there. That flies directly in the face of the Kabbalistic globalist agenda. It's the direct antithesis to it. And you can even look at the instance in Syria. It's like, he responded to the false flag attacks and Israel saying, we need to do something about Syria, but look, he attacked. It wasn't any place of strategic importance. The people that were there had gotten information well enough ahead of time and were able to get out, which shows that they were informed that the places were going to get struck. So it was a big to do about nothing. It was Trump saying, "Okay, here's reaction from us," and it didn't change anything in the outcomes in Syria. No side really benefited from those actions. So it's really hard to argue that he's solidly one side or the other. I think it lines up fairly well with his politics here. For the longest time, and even to today, he doesn't strictly look at things in the political binary of Democrat and Republican. For him, it's more about who, from my perspective, is pro United States. Pro Constitution, pro founding documents in general. It's not this dynamic. So either he's unaware of the larger game, which I doubt because he's obviously a very smart man and he's informed by a lot of people, or is he just keeping quiet and kind of playing low key on the whole issue?
Mm-hmm. Well, on that, if you look at people within the general culture, the dominant culture, it's pretty, lefty, it's loosey goosey, sort of inconsistent. But the funny thing is that even according to that, being enigmatic and not being easily read is a virtue to people in the dominant culture, and not having any principles and just doing what is uh, doing what's expedient or doing what is practical for their own purposes. So even to the values of the average person who's unprincipled, he's doing the right thing. So there's that, but but he's not going strictly anti-white. And he's not. I don't think he's siding with the leftist Jews. I think he's more aligned with the right wing Jews, and I think that Benjamin Netanyahu is on that side. I think that the leftist Jews are attacking him, so I think he's aligned with that side. But you could be wrong. If anyone knows better in the audience, just give us a comment. Let us know what faction he's with. But I think he's with the Orthodox Jews, and I think he's like his son-in-law there is with Chabad Lubavitch, if I said that right, which is a sect of Judaism, which is like it's sort of like a Orthodox where they yeah, the Lubavitch Lubavitch they it's like the side that they call themselves Orthodox, but they're also trying to transition people back into Judaism who haven't been involved for a while. So if you look into it, it's a pretty interesting organization. They've gotten busted numerous places for crime, drug running, and various other things. They don't have a very good reputation, but that's the side that Trump's with anyway. They're a bit they're considered by some to be kind of gangsters, but I don't have the whole story. That's just what I've gleaned so far. But yeah, I'm not as cynical as a lot of people about Trump. He is enigmatic. It's hard to say, but that's one of the consequences of being in the government and being in the state and interacting with the military, is that some things just are necessarily and annoyingly obfuscated, and they say one thing and do another, and they're more doing things that suit them. But I do think that Trump is genuine in trying to represent American interests first.
Yeah, he is, and his sentiments are not uncommon amongst patriots, particularly of his generation. That America is by default pro-Israel, so I don't think it's necessarily an inherent devious connection, but rather one that's just the environment that he's used to. So on that level, you can't really fault him for it. Now, if he has a deeper awareness of the situation and still continuing on, then yeah, you might have a case there. But bear in mind at the same time that he went essentially with the side of what got him elected to the presidency, because he sure as hell wouldn't have gotten it if he agreed with the Jews on the left, because of just national sentiment overall. But in the large scheme of which side is which, it ultimately doesn't matter, because there's a long history of kind of a fake interfaith conflict amongst Jews. Hitler noted it in Mein Kampf, and there's other instances of it throughout history. It kind of pulls the veil over people's eyes, because you have these two quote unquote opposing factions that ultimately want the same thing, and that's the domination of their kind, be they left or right. And that's why you see Jews at the forefront of championing their respective causes. And there's countless ones on the left But there's a few on the right like Mark Levin and Ben Shapiro. So there's kind of there seems to be a hierarchy of information within Judaism over who knows what. So to a degree, I think they're even manipulating their own people for their ends.
Yeah. So were you familiar with what happened with Trump in the UK and Trump with um, uh, what was it, the UK Prime Minister, Theresa May?
Well, I know there was a baby balloon, but yeah, no, there's
Yeah.
there's a bit more to it than that. I know he browbeat Theresa May over their immigration policy over there, and I think if I remember right, he kind of condemned the EU in general for how they handled their immigration crisis. And you have people coming up and say, "Well, how dare he? He's the American president. He's not European. How dare he?" Well, you have to bear in mind how often do you hear Europeans smugly telling the United States how we ought to do things? So they have really no room to bitch about that. And Trump's right. They need to be thinking about the native people of their own countries. England needs to be thinking about the Englishmen first, and the English and the Scots and the Welsh that they preside over politically. The Irish need to be looking out for the Irish first, and the same thing can be said about the Swedes and the Germans and the Norwegian and the French and the Spanish and you know name any country in Europe. And this applies, but they're not doing it. So Trump, by going over there and saying you guys need to get your shit together, is very much a nationalistic cause, because he's not telling them, do things the American way. He's saying take care of your own people, which nobody should be faulting him for, and anybody with any sense on the right or alt right, or however else you define yourself, or nationalist, these are things that you ought to be championing and shouting from the rooftops in favor of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the things that was great was listening to Trump just tell the rulers in Europe that it's going to be different. You know, you guys are wrecking the place, and he said that he loves Europe. He knows Europe very well, and that they're turning it upside down, and they ought to stop that. And he gave them a stern warning. And I think that no matter how cynical the European rulers are towards Trump and how much they hate him and how much all the liberals around Europe are protesting, and they even got some homosexuals to try to rape that balloon or balloons. But
I don't imagine that was a
yeah,
particularly
I
difficult thing to
think
accomplish for them.
yeah. But regardless of how cynical they are about Trump, he is powerful even in Europe, and he's making alliances. He's just spoke about having great conversations with the Italians and getting great relationship with them, and talking about their immigration. And he's telling them that you're wrecking the place. And someone with his power and influence, as much as people may hate him, the people respond to power and status, and so it has a lot of weight, even if they're poo-pooing it all over. So
Yeah, and again, he's aligning himself with nationalistic points of view that people and governments ought to be looking after their kin, their blood, their soil. He's maneuvering himself in such a way to promoting just flat out openly nationalist ideals. So it I don't get how people on our side just universally want to deride him and shun him just because they don't agree with him 100%, or just because he has some Jews in his cabinet and even in his extended family. When he's right about something, he's right about something, and you can take those points and run with it, and not try to discredit it, because ultimately that derides from the cause overall. I mean, those other things are points that can be focused on at another time.
Yeah. And I think Trump is doing a good job at something we're also interested in doing, which is having the American European outreach to connect us on, on whatever levels are appropriate. That Trump has said that the time is for nationalism, not internationalism, that we are going to have national sovereignty, and he directed the UN about this policy, and he actually commanded them. He's calling the shots, and he told them that we're going to be nationalists, and Trump is a nationalist. As much as people may dislike that, that's what he is, and yeah. So this idea of Trump going to Europe and trying to make friends and allies there, that's a great thing. We should be encouraging that all the way.
Yeah, and just to go back, because I imagine that some listeners might be pointing the finger at their screens and screaming that, oh, I support the Jews. Let's make one thing clear: I don't. When I said that that issue can be handled at another time, look at it from this perspective. They hold a lot of power still, mostly a lot of political power. Their cultural power and media power is starting to wane a bit, but they hold a lot of political power. And Trump couldn't, even in his position as president, couldn't go in fully and throw them out. So it's kind of a necessary, unfortunately, it's a necessary evil at this point. So it's something we have to work with it. It's repulsive, but it's the truth. And 2020 might change things. A few years later might change things. We don't know, but ultimately, what's important right now is that if whites are to survive, it's crucial, absolutely critical, that we hold all of our major countries, specifically the United States and Europe. United States foreign policy ought to focus around the of only supporting the European leaders who actually take the time to look out for their own people, instead of cucking out to Middle Eastern Abrahamic whims. So we ought to consider working with Russia on pressuring Europe to actually look out for the interests of their indigenous peoples. And if you look at what Trump's doing with his talks with Putin and whatnot, and if you look at his history on how he deals with politicians, including in the United States, you'll see that that's exactly what he's doing. He's aligning himself in this way. And in the end, the United States, Europe, and at least Western Russia should be one massive white bloc that works together to fight off these persistently invasive foreigners.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that, and also thanks for everybody for tuning into our show today. We really appreciate the feedback and listening to our show. I just wanted to remind people that our website is madopmedia.com. We'll put the links below. We've got the blog, the podcast, and a few other things there. There's a donate page. I'd encourage everyone to go drop us a tip if you like the show, and we really appreciate people donating. It helps us to keep going. So anyway, yeah, thank you everybody, and thank you Grimvera.
Thank you for hearing me out on all this. It was a good discussion. So I guess we'll sign off and leave it on with that, and look forward to having everybody join us next time.
Yep. Thanks. Bye bye.